Poetry, an introduction. In this video tutorial, you are going to learn more about what a poem is. I'm going to show you 3 examples, hopefully to tickle your fancy and make you want to read even more poetry. We're going to look at some important terms which you need to know in order to analyze and understand poetry, and I'm also going to suggest further reading on how to analyze and understand poetry. Let's begin with the last thing first this time. If you go to ndla.no and Engelsk, you will find a link on how to analyze poetry. In our learning resources, you will also find links and documents. And I advise you to use theory and knowledge from your Norwegian classes as well. So, what is a poem? Well, if you look the word up in a dictionary, you might find something like this. In the brackets, you can see how the word is pronounced, poem. You can also see that this is a noun, it's substantive. Poem is a countable noun, which means that it's a poem, the poem, and then if you add an S, you get the plural form, poems. This didn't really make us very much wiser when it comes to what a poem actually is, did it? Okay, let's move on. Edgar Allan Poe, who's a famous American poet, said that poetry is the rhythmical creation of beauty in words. Very many scholars have tried to define exactly what a poem is, but this has proved to be a very difficult task. Either way, we're going to look at Will Conley's definition of the word. He says, a poem is an arrangement of words containing meaning and musicality. Most poems take the form of a series of lines separated into groups called stanzas. A poem can be rhyming or non-rhyming, with a regular meter or a free flow of polyrhythms. There is debate over how a poem should be defined, but there is little doubt about its ability to set a mood. Now don't worry if there were quite a few words in this text which you didn't understand, like lines, or stanzas, or meter, or rhyme, because those are some of the key words that we're going to look at further in this lesson. Let's look at 3 examples of poems. Now, I have to admit that these poems have been chosen quite randomly, because there are millions and billions of poems out there. Distracted, the Mother Said to Her Boy by Gregory Harrison. Distracted, the mother said to her boy, do you try to upset and perplex and annoy? Now give me 4 reasons and don't play the fool, why you shouldn't get up and get ready for school. Her son replied slowly, well, mother, you see, I can't stand the teachers and they detest me. And there isn't a boy or a girl in the place that I like or, in turn, that delights in my face. And I'll give you 2 reasons, she said, why you ought. Get yourself off to school before you get caught, because first, you are 40, and next, you young fool, it's your job to be there, you're the head of the school. In my opinion, this is an example of a poem that's quite funny, and you understand it only at the very end of the poem when you see that, well, the young boy who doesn't want to go to school, he's not really that young, he's 40 years old, and is actually the headmaster of the school. Let's look at another example. The Red Wheelbarrow by William Carlos Williams. The Red Wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rain water beside the white chickens. The third example I'd like to show you is a poem written by a lady called Stevie Smith. Before I read this poem, there are a couple of words which I would like to explain. First, moaning. To moan means å stønne in Norwegian. A chap is a man. It's slang for a man. Larking means to have fun, å ha det gøy. To give way. His heart gave way. To give way means to give up. Not waving, but drowning. Nobody heard him, the dead man, but still he lay moaning. I was much farther out than you thought, and not waving, but drowning. Poor chap, he always loved larking, and now he's dead. It must have been too cold for him. His heart gave way, they said. Oh no, no, no. It was too cold always. Still, the dead one lay moaning. I was much too far out all my life, and not waving, but drowning. To me, this poem is about somebody who tries to call out for help, but people don't understand it. They see him as waving, while he feels that he's drowning. Important terms. I would now like to use the examples that I've just read to help you understand a few important terms when it comes to analyzing poetry. Lines and stanza. Those are two words which you've heard quite a few times already. Let's have a look at not waving but drowning. A line is, well, a line in a poem. So this nobody heard him, the dead man, is one line in the poem. A stanza is a collection of lines. So in this poem you have 1, 2, 3 stanzas. Rhyme and meter or rhythm. Those are two other important terms. If we go back to Distracted the mother said to her boy, you can see that this poem has a very clear rhythm, very clear meter, and also that it rhymes. Let's have a look at the rhythm first. Distracted the mother said to her boy, do you try to upset and perplex and annoy? Now you can hear that this is rhythmical. You can also see that there are end rhymes in this poem. Boy, annoy. Fool, school. Free verse. This is when a poem doesn't have a particular rhyme or rhythm. The Red Wheelbarrow is an example of a poem that has free verse. Imagery is another important term. Two of the main images we use are called metaphor, or simile, sammenligning in Norwegian. And if you go to your Norwegian class, you will find a video explaining these images. Let's have a look at some examples from Not Waving but Drowning. I guess one could say that this entire poem is an image in itself, because it's not really about an actual dead man talking about how he was drowning, but it's an image of how a person living in society feels isolated and alone and cries out for help, but nobody can really understand this or hear him. If we look closer, we can also find a couple of examples on metaphors, like it was too cold always. Now, this is a metaphor of society and how he feels alienated or isolated or left out of society. Symbol is another important term. In Not Waving but Drowning, perhaps the dead man himself can be a symbol of individuals living in society feeling alone. Theme, tema. The theme of a poem is, what is this poem really about? What is it trying to tell us? The theme in Not Waving but Drowning could be individual versus society, feeling alone in society. When it comes to theme in The Red Wheelbarrow, I guess that your guess is as good as mine, because this poem is a bit difficult to understand exactly what it means. Joy and the personal identification in little things, how simplicity, everyday life can be beautiful, is one possible theme, I guess. There are very many more important terms that you can use when analyzing poetry, but these are some of the most important ones. To sum up, poetry combines meaning and musicality. A poem is a text that can say very much in few words. A poem therefore demands interpretation. A poem often has layered meanings. It can mean very many different things, and every single word becomes important. Imagery and symbols are important, usually. Poems have lines and stanzas, most of the time. Poems also can have rhythm and meter, or they can have free verse or even a combination. The creative use of language is something that defines poems. You have to look at choices of words, how the sentences are built. It can also experiment with grammar, etc. Poems can be serious or they can be playful. They can be simple or they can be complex, traditional or modern, and they can be life-changing or just entertaining.